Hello everyone, I am excited today to talk to you about swim form and stroke technique, and we are going to talk about the elements of drag as they relate to efficiency. So we're going to talk about the way in which you create drag as you swim, and then how we can eliminate that drag as we go through various drills and whatnot. Okay, so let's talk about the forces of drag, and in particular, these particular forces: the kick, the head position, body position, hand and arm position. Those are all the primary areas that create drag when you swim. But first, I want to introduce the concept of kind of this idea of swimming within a tube. And you can see here, this graphic kind of just depicts that in the sense that when you swim, and again, this is just sort of a moment in time when you swim, all the drag forces here, which are constant, and you're unable to eliminate those, is where your hand position is out in front of you, your head position, and then your shoulder position. In this position, that's creating the least amount of drag. You're nice and horizontal in the water. Your back and your hips and legs and feet all fall behind the areas out in front of you that create this drag. However, once your hands and your stroking arm and your kicking legs fall outside of this tube that you've created here, then you're creating extra drag. And some of that drag is necessary because the stroking arm and the kick help with propulsion. So those obviously have to be part of the swim stroke, but we want to try to minimize the drag they create as you swim while maximizing the propulsion. So let's focus here on the drag and the various positions and elements that affect drag. So the body position, hand position, head position, they all kind of interrelate. um, as you have an upper torso that's going up at an angle, the head often is part of that upward angle, so you get a lot of extra drag hitting that. Swimmers will drop their elbow and ski their hand upwards, which creates drag. And in part, some of that is due to having a poor kick. So when your kick is poor, oftentimes your legs drop down below your hips, and this upward angle of the torso and head are created. And once you can master a more productive kick, then you actually find yourself being able to maintain a better horizontal position. And we'll talk about that in more detail as we go. Okay, so let's kind of jump right into this, and we're going to talk about these four different forces. We're going to start off with the kick. And you can see here, essentially, there are two primary ways in which the kick creates drag. And the first way is this over excessive kick that falls outside the body tube. Again, that's represented here by the red lines, and anything that falls outside of that tube then creates drag. And with the kick in particular, when your feet or when your ankles fall outside of that tube, then you're really creating that excess drag. If your toes fall outside of it or part of your foot, usually not, because that's part of the kicking and propulsion process. But you can see this individual on the left, really wide kick, and that usually comes from having a lot of excess rotation or a very flat rotation, and the person crossing over the front of them with their stroke. And I'll show you that in a slide a little bit later. So a lot of excess drag here, really wide kick, nice narrow kick, well within the body frame for the individual on the right. And so all the water that is streaming underneath them and over top of them is not getting caught up inside the kick, where there's a lot of eddies and whatnot created, versus this individual, all the flow of water going in that direction as they're going down the pool this direction gets caught up in the kick, creating that extra drag. Okay, another way in which you have um, the issue of drag with your kick is the fact that your kick is very unproductive, and it actually falls well below the body frame, which in turn also creates this upward angle of the body, creating more drag at the torso. And oftentimes the head will also be part of that drag. So having a poor kick, as I mentioned at the beginning, really contributes to a lot of drag overall. And there's several elements that can be correct or rectified when you improve your kick. So you can see the individual on the right, nice productive kick, very fluid within the body frame. So all the flow of water as they're moving down the pool that direction falls on outside of the kicking action of the leg, so it doesn't get caught up inside the leg and create a lot of turbulence. Okay, all right, so let's move on just to a still visual of how that all looks. You know, you're trying to make your way down the pool this way, but if your body is more at an angle, then you can see how you're getting all this drag. And just imagine, you know, sitting in your car and putting your hand out the window. And if you put a flat hand into the wind, lots of forces, lots of drag, but the more angled down to where your hand is horizontal to the ground, obviously a lot less drag. And so the same concept occurs here in the pool. And remember, water is around 650 times denser than air. So when there's just a minor little change in your form to create extra drag, it is really accentuated for that reason. So trying to really eliminate or reduce drag in the water is a very good way to improve your results as a swimmer. Okay. All right, so let's talk about eliminating drag. How do we do that relative to the kick? And I have basically 3 bullet points I want to talk about. The kick is fairly complex, but I want to kind of break it down so it's a little more simplified so you can kind of wrap your head around that. The first part of the kick is extension of the hips. And when you talk about extension of the hips, think of yourself standing up on the ground, and your left foot is on a box and your right foot is hanging off the box, and you can point your toe towards the ground. Move your right leg backwards using your glutes, and that's hip extension. So imagine doing that in the water when you're horizontal, okay, and you have a nice toe, your toes are nicely pointed. And so as soon as that occurs, and as soon as you feel your foot crack, your heel cracking the surface of the water, that's your indicator that you have good extension in the hip. Then you immediately drop the knee. Okay, you get a little bit of knee bend in here. Thigh drops with it slightly. And immediately following that is this knee extension, followed by the whipping action of the lower leg and the foot. Okay, and that's how that looks in this still picture here. Okay, might be hard to visualize how you do that in the water, so let's take a look at that. And this individual has a nice rhythmical kick following those 3 bullet points where you get a nice hip extension, and it's very slight. It's not very overt, you know, because the kick is basically staying within the body frame, so you don't need a lot of extension at the hip, but you can see the knee drops, and immediately the shin and the pointed toes get whipped through the water to create that propulsion, and it also creates a lot of balance, keeps you horizontal in the water. A lot of triathletes struggle with kicking, and being able to utilize the kick as a means for reducing drag can be more productive than actually trying to make it something that helps with propulsion. Okay, all right, so let's talk about some of the drills that you can utilize to improve your kick and reduce drag. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details with these drills because there's a handout that specifically talks about these drills that will accompany this this video. So Kicking with fins, probably one of the best and most long-standing ways to develop a kick. The use of fins is very common amongst most swimmers. And typically I recommend using fins either at the beginning or end of a workout. And they're used just modestly throughout all of training. And you don't want to overdo that because it causes some other issues. The vertical skull with kick can also be a good way to develop kick, especially for beginners. This is essentially simulating the kicking that you would do horizontally, but you're vertically in the water and you're sculling with your hands underneath the water to maintain your floating position. Okay. For more experienced swimmers, you can do a 4 or 6 or an 8 kick and then a full stroke. You can do that with or without kickboards like this individual is doing here on the right. You can do that on the stomach or on your side. Single leg kicking, can be also very good. For those who have a hard time kind of getting that kinesthetic feel when both legs are kicking at the same time, and if you're doing it correctly, that can be a way to eliminate one leg and just focus on the other leg while it kicks. And then you can alternate back and forth, which can help you to make better progress. I mentioned earlier that one of the ways to actually assess whether or not you have the first part of the kick is appropriate, which is the hip extension, is when the heels crack the surface of the water. So make sure you pay attention to that as you swim. And then another great way to improve your kick is, it's not really a drill, but you can kind of use it like a drill, is to squeeze your butt cheeks and tighten your back. Essentially just tighten your posture. Oftentimes tightening your posture will help raise the hips and get you a little more horizontal in the water. It will also tighten up your kick if you have kind of a loose, wide kick. So utilize this in a drill, meaning you won't swim like this the entire time. You might swim it every 25 or every other 50 or something like that during a swim. And that way you can start to create some muscle memory around a proper way to kick. So all these are great. And again, they're all covered in the handout that's going to accompany this particular video. Okay, so let's move beyond the kick and how different other positions create drag. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the head position. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it really goes in line with what's happening with the kick and the torso. But it has its own correction that you should follow in terms of creating a better head position to eliminate the hips from dropping. Because in a lot of swimmers, if you raise your head really far out of the water, it will actually, even if you have a good kick, it will force your torso to also go up at an angle and your hips to drop, automatically creating drag. So if you have a poor kick and you also bring your head up, that just exacerbates this whole drag effect throughout the whole body. So you have basically 4 different head positions that are shown in this graphic. And the best in terms of drag is number 1, but it's not very effective in terms of you being able to swim well and know where you're going and see what's in front of you, particularly in open water. So usually 2 and 3 are the best options, 2 being the best option, so where you can see out in front of you, but you can also maintain a good horizontal position with the torso and the hips because your head is not coming up so far. Once you get into 3 and especially 4, then you really start to run the risk of your torso getting driven down, your hips getting driven down, and actually reducing the effectiveness of your kick if you're a good kicker. So head positions look like this. You're looking at a downward angle of probably 10-15 degrees and maybe 10 or 15 feet out in front of you down the pool. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the head rotation as it relates to drag. So not only is your head position as it's in the water affecting drag, but when you breathe, it can also create drag. And you can see that in this individual here on the left, where when they breathe, instead of keeping their head horizontal to the water, they actually tilt it upwards in order to get a bigger breath. Now, part of that might be just experience and not being in very good condition and they feel like they need to get a bigger breath. Other times it can just be habit, which needs to be broken. And really what you want to feel when you turn your head is that your head is kind of an extension of your shoulders, and it rotates sideways to the point where your face is just halfway out of the water. Your mouth is just out of the water just to get enough breath, and you rotate back underneath. Okay. All right. So again, kind of like your head position underneath the water. These are things that you can focus on during any swim, any drill, to be able to help you to and make those improvements. Okay. So hip rotation, that's another position issue that people have related to drag. And again, when you're talking about getting your body outside of that tube, or not being around the long axis. And I try to create axis for the individual on the left and an axis for the individual on the right. And if you have a nice rotation around that axis without a lot of twisting or torquing motion, then you're going to be much smoother, create a lot less drag, and frankly, just you won't expend nearly as much energy getting yourself down the pool, which is what is happening to this individual here on the left versus the individual here on the right. Nice, smooth rotation around the axis as they enter the water, their kick, everything about them is staying inside that tube versus this individual on the left. A really wide kick, a lot of torquing action. Their body's actually twisting and torquing around their axis. So a lot of drag being created here. Okay. All right. And so those things have to be eliminated, and I'll talk about the ways you can do that and achieve that here in a bit. And again, these drills are part of the handout that'll accompany this video. So in order to eliminate or at least reduce the amount of drag that your rotation causes, a shoulder touch drill can be effective. A single arm drill can be effective. 6-kick rotation drill, which is similar to what this person is doing. They're using a kickboard in that. A 2-beat kick. A 2-beat kick is something that I haven't really talked about very much, but it's a rhythm and timing element that can slow down the kick enough to where you can focus on keeping it nice and tight and not feel like it has to be something that is causing you too much rotation issues. So that can be another way to deal with rotation drag. And then core strength. Everybody can do with extra core strength. Individuals, such as you saw earlier, who had a lot of twisting and torquing, typically they have very poor core strength, and they could do a lot better in terms of reducing their drag if they were to improve their core strength. Okay, so let's move on here to a couple of positions with the arms and how it relates to drag. And the first one is the entry phase. And that's the phase at which your hand and arm enters the water. And the way it creates drag primarily is when your hand crosses over this midline here, okay? And this midline is a axis point, which I mentioned earlier. And you never want your hands or arms to really fall over that, that axis line, either outside in the entry phase or during the pull phase or catch phase, because that just creates extra drag. There's also issues with it not optimizing your pull. So, but we're focusing on drag, so that's the way in which it will create drag. And the way I get people to try to reduce or minimize this issue is think of your hands and your arms on railroad ties, and those railroad ties come directly out of your shoulders. And soon as you are starting your entry phase, those hands and arms have to stay on the railroad ties, just like a train, you know, can't get off the ties, off the track. So you want to be thinking of that in order to visualize how the hand enters the water and not create that extra drag. Okay, you can see that in swimming motion here with this individual on the left. Again, I have a rotation of axis point. And you can see easily arms are going across in front of their head. And this individual also is entering very close to their head. And I'll talk about extension here in a minute. But again, I use the individual on the right as my reference. Super smooth stroke, kind of the ideal, if you will, something to try to mimic, you know, as best you can, and working with all the drills and improving your swimming. Okay. All right, so let's talk about ways to the ways in which other positions of the arm can create drag. Next one is the catch phase. Okay, the catch phase is a phase in which you've extended your arm out in front. You're about ready to begin your pull to create some propulsion. And a lot of people who are inflexible in their shoulders will wind up having this formation in their arm. So again, here's their body tube right here. And the minute their arm drops below that body tube, you're creating drag. And as soon as their hand starts to ski upward, this individual is not too bad, but if their hand is skiing upward, that's just another way they create drag. So when you look at that compared to the person here on the right, so here's their body frame right here, and the hand, elbow are all within the body frame. Okay, they're not creating extra drag by, you know, the elbow dropping outside of that body frame. There's many other elements that this creates in terms of poor propulsion, but since we're focusing on drag, I cover that in a different video. Okay, so you can kind of see that in action here. This individual on the left, low elbow position, actually a low torso position, head. Look how they're looking almost directly ahead. If they were to get that elbow to stay a little bit higher and drop their head down, they would probably improve their efficiency, you know, 10–20% just by doing those things. Versus the individual on the right, you can see nice high elbow position, hand, elbow right out in front of them, no extra drag being created by a dropped elbow. So that's the catch and how it creates drag. In the pull phase, so the pull phase is the next phase after catch. There are certain arm positions that also create drag here. It may sound counterintuitive because you're pulling yourself through the water trying to create propulsion. But as you move through the water, again, the farther outside the arm is and the hand is from the tube, and the longer it's outside that tube, the more it's going to create drag. This is probably one of the areas that is the least, that creates the least amount of drag, and is obviously very necessary in order to create propulsion. So I don't spend a lot of time on it, but the biggest way in which you create drag from the pull is when you have a straight arm pull like this, because that's a huge surface area that water is pressing on as you're creating that that pull stroke, versus over here. Okay, this is a little less surface area with the bent elbow, and you don't spend as much time in the pull phase when your elbow is bent versus the extended phase like this. Okay. So in a video format, that's what this looks like here. So this person, as you can see on the left, their arm is almost virtually straight. Right arm almost virtually straight. The right arm tracks well outside their shoulder. Left arm not so much because that's their non-breathing side. Okay, versus the swimmer on the right. Nice, good position with the pull. Hand is in line with the shoulder, bent elbow, all the things you want to see in terms of reducing drag. Okay. All right. So some of the ways that you can correct your arm position as it relates to improvements, not for drag, it'll also help improvement in other ways as well. That's for the entry, catch, and pull phases we just covered. Is really focused around this idea of the early vertical forearm. And that's this position here where as you start to take a stroke, you have kind of this drop of the forearm and hand out in front of you so you can pull quicker and easier. And some of the drills that can help you do that are the fist drill and the sculling. This is actually a picture of a sculling drill, which is simulating the way in which the arm will pull through the water. And then a fist paddle fulcrum. Again, these drills are all covered in the handout that accompanies this email, so I'm not going to go into, or accompanies this presentation. So I'm not going to go into detail about those. So, okay. One of the other ways that you can eliminate drag is to improve your flexibility. And I cannot overstate this enough, that flexibility is dramatically overlooked in terms of its effectiveness on improving your swimming. And so when you can improve your flexibility, you can improve the amount of drop that you have in your elbow because your shoulders are more flexible. You can maintain a higher position in the water so your elbows don't drop. You can also improve your ability to rotate better and get your arm around for the entry phase. And then with hip flexibility, you can have a better and more effective kick with improving your flexibility. So when you talk about upper body, I'll just use this as an example of having good or very good flexibility and what it means to have poor flexibility. So this individual on the left actually has pretty good flexibility. The assessment for this type of exercise is if you can have a fist length between your fingertips here, then you have average flexibility. If you can touch your fingers like this individual here on the left, then you have above average flexibility. If you can interlace your fingers, then you have very good flexibility. So do that on both shoulders. So right shoulder over top and then left shoulder over top. And you may find you have a difference. Most people do. So you may have to improve flexibility more on one side versus the other. So doing a lot of shoulder stretching, stretching of the chest and upper back can also be improve your flexibility. Not to mention doing a lot of hip flexing, flexibility at work too. Okay. So I'm going to finish off here with talking a little bit about this entry and extension phase. I mentioned it a little bit in regards to drag, but I want to talk a little bit about how it relates to propulsion. Neither entry or extension are directly related to propulsion, but they set up the catch and the pull phases of the are directly involved in propulsion. So when you think of the entry phase, and here I underline perpetuating propulsion because they're not directly involved in that. A couple of visuals to think about. One is your fingers go first into the water. Fingers always go first in the water, and your forearm, elbow, and upper arm all follow that as though you're putting your whole arm into the coat sleeve of a long sleeve shirt or something like that, where your fingertips always go first. Palm is always down when it hits the water. Don't hit your thumb down first. Fair number of swimmers do that, and it takes a little bit of extra time to reorientate it to set yourself up for a good catch and pull. Plus, there can be a lot of shoulder injury issues when your thumb hits the water first, or your index finger hits the water first. Okay, don't cross the center line like we talked about earlier. and you want your arm at near full extension when you enter the water. You saw in that earlier video, the female swimmer whose hand entered almost directly in front of her head. That really does not set you up well for a good catch, because now you have to go through a lot of extended motion, what we used to call glide motion out in front of you, in order to set up a good catch. Versus when you have a near extension like this individual here, you're already at a point where you can almost begin the catch phase as you enter the water. Okay, so timing is definitely an issue here. So you can see here on the on the left some incorrect positions: the crossing over the center line, the thumb going into the water first. If you have this issue, then your palm is facing the sides of the pool as opposed to the bottom of the pool. Okay, I will actually have people who have extreme issues like this, as this individual does, focus on a karate chop swim, where they're actually swimming and getting the sensation of putting their pinky in first. And oftentimes what will happen is they'll actually flatten out their stroke. So that's a good correction. Correct form, this individual on the right, again, this is my go-to guy. Nice flat entry, nice long extended arm, fingertips first, all the things that you should do. Okay, and again, going back, this is that individual I mentioned earlier. So you can see how close her hand enters to her head. Right arm is a little better, but on her breathing side, man, now she has to go through that long extension period out in front of her, versus this individual is almost fully extended, so they can immediately go into their catch, and that can help with improving your stroke rate. So this person probably has a lower stroke rate, just in part because they have to go through an extra amount of time to create extra extension. Okay. All right. So in terms of corrections, we've talked about this a little bit already when we talked about drag, but I'll reemphasize it here. Visualize your hands coming out of railroad ties and staying directly in line with your shoulders. The zipper drill and the shoulder touch drill are similar. You can see the example of a shoulder touch drill here. Okay, that really helps to focus on this extended arm out in front of you. Not necessarily the arm that is touching the drills. It's more this and arm out in front of you, making sure that it stays in line with the shoulder. Okay, and then when this arm drops off the shoulder, that's when you can focus on where it enters into the water. Okay, and it helps to keep it in line with the shoulder. Okay, now let's talk about the extension. So the extension is as soon as your hand is entering the water, then you're extending it out in front of you, underneath the water. And so there are a couple of things that you want to consider. Again, the railroad tracks idea still holds true, to keep it in line with the shoulders. Don't cross the center line, just like your entry phase. Get full extension as you swim. Okay, be sure that you get a nice long reach out in front of you. And so by having a near extension when you enter the water, just reduces the amount of time that it takes you to do this. And part of that will come through not just extending your arm, but literally as when you have good rotation through the hips and the torso, you're able to get a better extension out in front of you. And that extension really allows you to grab more water out here in order to create better propulsion. Okay, so that's important. Don't drop the elbow. We've talked about that in previous slides. Creates a lot of drag, but it also does not allow you to be set up for a good catch phase. And it's important that your elbows stay high in order for that catch phase to occur, because that's the beginning of the propulsion part of your stroke. Okay. Ideally, you have a horizontal position, horizontal position in the water with your arm. Okay. but having a slightward down angle is also perfectly fine. And even some people who have a tendency to drop their elbow, this might be a good recommendation for them is to actually down slope your hand and your arm in the water to prevent you from having that dropped arm or that dropped elbow. Okay. I mentioned the good hip rotation because good hip rotation helps good torso rotation and helps you to drive that extended arm through the shoulder and get it nice and long out in front of you. So you want to feel, when you're extended like this, you want to feel like you're skating on your hips and you're nice and long. Okay. So you can see here kind of the idea of a dropped elbow again, the hand skiing out in front of her, in front of him, and then over here, nice. This is a little bit slightly downward angle, mostly horizontal here. Okay, but good long extension for this individual. Getting ready to go into the pull phase there, or catch phase, sorry. Okay, so catch, this is this is that next phase, and you've seen this video a couple of times in this presentation, but the extension and catch are very close together to each other, and they interact with each other quite a bit. So you got a low elbow, high ski, doesn't allow for good catch, versus this individual here, nice high elbow, can almost begin their catch immediately to help with a higher stroke rate when they swim. Okay. And you can see here, this is another issue that you can have with extension, where this individual is almost getting no extension, even though they have a fairly straight arm. They're almost like a windmill in the water. Okay, their arm is going directly down into an angle that is not really allowing them to get good propulsion. This individual here, getting nice horizontal in the water before they start their stroke. There's some improvements that can be done there, but in terms of the comparison between the two, yeah, you definitely want to have something that mimics more of this individual here versus that individual there. They need to have a little bit more extension phase that's more horizontal to the water than what they have now. Okay. So extension, how do we improve extension? Then the primary way to do that is through drills, like a lot of this stuff. And again, these drills are part of the handout that I'm going to provide. So you can use paddles, very similar to using fins for improving your kicking, but using paddles can help with extension. Essentially, it's like having a ski on your hand, and it basically forces you to have a longer extension out in front of you. And again, like fins, I recommend only using those a small percentage of the time, and they can be used throughout the workout. Fins I usually recommend beginning and after workouts, but paddles can be used at any time. A one-stroke drill, is great because you can focus on the arm out in front of you to make sure you're staying nice and long and extended. Usually with anything as one-stroke drill for beginners, I usually recommend that you also have fins because maintaining a good horizontal position in order to make this effective and being able to hold that position is difficult without fins. So usually I recommend fins for those who have a poor kick or definitely who are new to swimming. Okay. All right. And then improve shoulder flexibility. I mentioned that several times in terms of how it can improve overall swimming. So again, being able to maintain good flexibility in the shoulder to even maintain this position in the water is important. Some people who have really tight shoulders cannot do this position. And so it's hard for them to even practice it because of their shoulder flexibility, particularly in the rear deltoids and the rhomboids on the back. Okay, all right. So hopefully you got a lot of good information out of that presentation, mostly all related to drag and the ways in which drag can hinder you in your swimming, but then the ways that you can improve your drag position. Okay, until next time, happy swimming.